You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show with your host, Bryan Callen.
I'm going to read from how they describe this book on Amazon. The book is called In the Jungle, Camping with the Enemy. Our guest is W. James Seymour. And to know a little bit about him, during the Vietnam War, when conventional warfare tactics weren't proving enough to eliminate communist insurgency, the U.S. Army implemented small unit operations to take a new kind of fight to the enemy. 5 to 6 man long-range patrol teams composed of specially trained young enlisted soldiers who went behind enemy lines to gather intelligence on Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army units, capture POWs, or set deadly ambushes that unnerved the enemy in their once-thought secured jungle sanctuaries. These were called Long Range Patrol, or LRP teams, and essentially would lead to the reestablishment of the 75th Infantry Ranger Companies in combat and would carry on the proud history and legacy of the U.S. Army Rangers. I got some goosebumps just saying that. I don't know why. It would also earn them a coveted place in special operations units at times at a painful and deadly cost. And in this remarkably humble, first-hand account, Seymour covers what it took to do 54 LRP Ranger missions behind the lines and the dozens of team insertions and white-knuckle extractions that he took part in.
Bryan, how many LRP missions have you done?
Well, a little part of me dies when I talk to a man like James Seymour because I am not as much a man as he is. And I want to add one more caveat. The man was stung on his piece by a scorpion, and he took some Benadryl and kept moving. You're talking about a man here, ladies and gentlemen. James Seymour, welcome to the Bryan Callen / Hunter Mott Show.
Thank you, I think. Okay, let me say something right now.
Please.
Okay, I did not write any of that you just read.
I understand, but it just still sounds very impressive. I wish there were some trumpets behind me as I read it.
No, and I do not walk on water unless I'm ice skating.
Well, every time I meet a guy who's been in it, and when I say in it, in the muck, and has done the things that usually you have to experience to understand,
right.
They always come out of it, from my experience, very humbled, and I guess that's kind of what I gathered from the book. I thought the book was very well written. The missions were unbelievable, and I thought it was really interesting to watch the difference between the letters you were writing to your family when you first got there versus the letters you were writing to them after or right before you left.
Oh, when I was growing up?
That's exactly right, because you got in there at 19, and you left a very old and wizened 21-year-old.
Yes, I got there very starry-eyed and gung-ho, and then I just went to war, I guess.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, what you're saying there, I can agree with you. Anybody that's been in the bang-bang and watched stuff blow up and explode, there's no way if you survive that you can brag about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's people have said that just because of the number of the missions and all of that I must have been really, really good. And my answer to that is no, I was really, really lucky, and I always had some good people on my teams.
You said something that really resonated with me in the book. When you were watching Paths of Glory, a movie I saw as well. And
that one, I remember that afternoon, bingo.
Yeah, and tell us what I think it was your father or your grandfather said to you.
It was my grandfather, and in the book I make mention that at all of the reunions, all of the menfolk would gather around and talk about what they did in Europe or Africa or wherever. And my grandfather was not in World War I. He had a job in the shipyard. But we were watching Paths of Glory, and you know the movie. Kirk Douglas is the guy.
And it's about trench warfare and the insanity, how men were used as cannon fodder at the order of a small group of arrogant generals who were willing to essentially sacrifice hundreds of thousands, if not millions of men just to gain some ground that didn't mean as much.
They were playing chess, which is okay as long as you're sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
And they weren't there in the mud or the trenches, so they didn't really see what the pawns were going through. But watching that movie on TV, this is way before George Lucas and all the special effects and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But I remember watching it on a TV. It was black and white in those days. And they showed this hill and a whole bunch of people crawling all around it, and then everything blowing up, and then everybody running back down and falling down and getting shot and things like that. It was kind of stupid. Mm. And that's when my grandfather looked over at me, and he actually said that something to the effect that all of those men were wasted as cannon fodder, and if you ever go into the service, I think we had just had a family reunion the week before or something, some barbecue or something. He said, if you ever go into the service, try to get into a small unit where you can get some training, and you wouldn't be just the luck of the draw like these guys. Mm. And I was about 9 years old at the time. And for some reason, that afternoon, that movie, what he was saying, really resonated, not resonated, it just stuck in my memory. Mm-hmm. And then the 60s came, and, it was the patriotic thing to do, and everybody did it. Mm. Me too.
Well, not everybody did it, because you went into an elite group of guys, and you touch on it. You don't really talk about it, but the training was pretty brutal, and a lot of guys didn't make it. In fact, most guys didn't make it. They didn't graduate into these small units. What do you think? And you talk about being a high school athlete, but you talk about being 5'6", and a lot of guys were bigger. What do you think it was about you that carried you through that training?
Oh, geez. I'll tell you right now in one word. Embarrassment.
That's amazing. You just didn't want to be embarrassed.
By quitting, yeah.
Because you didn't want to go back to the menfolk who'd all been in the Army, I guess.
There was a lot of that, but at the same time, once I got out of the engineers and then got into the Lerp unit and started the training there, everything that I was learning as a Lerp was really what the recruiter had told me I would be doing in the Special Forces when I first signed up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And all of this stuff, like I said in the book, it used a lot of common sense. And even though I was a non-combatant at the time, because I was just going through the training, I remember a lot of the other units that I would be reading their reports on the teletype, and they were just going around, walking around, getting into trouble and walking back home, and it didn't really seem to make a whole bunch of sense. And talking to some of those infantry veterans that were going through the training with me, everything I heard about the old-fashioned way we're fighting in Vietnam that doesn't make any sense, it didn't seem to work in the Lerps. This is what we're going to do. This works. And when they also said that the other guys know how the U.S. Army reacts, that wakes you up right there.
And when you're talking about the old-fashioned way of fighting, what exactly do you mean?
Oh, we're going to go in and we're going to kill Hitler and the war's over because we took Berlin.
Right. And
one objective, the enemy is gone, we won, now we can all go home. Vietnam was not like that at all.
Well, and I think that's what's interesting is the different ways in which you lay that out, in which you explore that. I mean, firstly, within the teams, right? You measured success as a Lerp in terms of making no contact with the enemy. And
Correct.
Then there were a lot of teams that were going in and they were measuring success by whether they had made contact with the enemy.
Well, body counts.
Right, body counts.
Yeah, that was near the end.
Mm-hmm.
When I was getting ready to leave, I think in the last 7 or 8 months, you could see that the mission objective had changed quite a bit when we moved down south to Phuoc Vinh. We were then trying to stop or find out where they were coming across the Cambodian border. And the people at that time, the press or whatever, it's like I think I actually said it in the book, but if we had a quiet mission, they kind of expected us to do some damage on the last day.
Wow.
And one of the things, I mean, there are so many lines in the book that really stuck out to me, but one of them was, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, the name of this town, but we're still here at Quang Tri trying to help the Marines. They finally
Right.
changed their tactics and are starting to hold their own. What is that?
Okay,
Yeah.
that is a 20-year-old bragging, and the reason we're bragging about that is, well, you saw when I had the shopping trip in the book, and we stole a bunch of stuff that we used as bartering material when we got up the road further, and the Marines at that time, I'm going to get everybody in your audience that's a jarhead really mad at me right now.
That's all right.
But no, it isn't, because I know we're going to hear about it and you guys are going to catch the flack. But Quezon was a good example of stupidity. If you've got a great big valley and it's got mountain ridges all around it, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You can visualize that.
Yep.
And then down in the middle of the valley, you put a great big airstrip and you make an artillery base, and then you say you own the valley.
Good luck.
Who is going to believe you?
Not the indigenous culture, not the people that have been living there for thousands of years, that's for sure.
Right, and the trouble was when they made that camp at Quezon, they did it just like what I just described. And up in the mountains around the valley, they had all of these cannon and artillery that were dug into the mountainside, shooting down.
So you're saying the Viet Cong did?
Yes,
Yeah. That would
they
make
were
sense.
they were already there before the Marines made their camp at Quezon.
Wow. But I don't
So-
think you're saying anything heretical here or insulting to the Marine Corps. I think that if we don't learn from these lessons, and one of the things I got from your book, and one of the things I got from John Nagl's book, reading it, is that we haven't learned a lot of the lessons necessarily. We didn't apply a lot of the lessons we learned that you touch on in Vietnam, and we did not apply them necessarily as well as we could have in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think that's important to dilate on. I think it's important that you say these things because I don't think the Marine Corps, my dad was a Marine, I don't think the Marine Corps is adverse to learning and growing and applying what they learned. And that usually means look, when I'm 47, when I talk to young people, I say, you know why you should listen to me? Because I've made a lot more mistakes than you have. That's what qualifies me to tell you how
What you're saying is you learn by making mistakes.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, now we're talking Vietnam. The guys that were carrying the rifles, the ones that were walking in the mud, they were learning a hell of a lot.
Mm-hmm.
When it got passed upstairs, somewhere it got translated wrong, and the people that were making a lot of the plans, playing the chess game actually, weren't really listening to what was coming up. And
Well-
they kept acting the way they were taught, and you can't really blame them, other than you really want to get mad at them, but it's stupid.
Well, but that's, Robert McNamara, The Fog of War. I mean, part of what was happening was that information wasn't being passed up. Somewhere along the way, people wanted to tell people like McNamara the things that they wanted to hear, and so they end up changing the reports that are coming up. And I think that's a large part of what Brian's saying as well, is that, we absolutely had a mental model for how you fight a war that came out of World War II, what you were saying, and then we've tried to apply that same model again and again to situations where it doesn't necessarily apply, or rather where it doesn't apply.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And a good example is, just like the unit that I was in, the Lerp unit,
Mm-hmm.
The Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol. That's a mouthful, big deal, just say Lerp. But the Lerp unit that I was in and all of the other Lerp units that were in Vietnam, they were really performing admirably, doing something with no lesson plan.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, having to improvise.
Because it was improvised. Every unit that was over there was fighting in a different locale. And I was in the first cav that had all of the helicopters, so we could go flying way out to the Cambodian border, and then they would drop us off, and we are really out in the middle of nowhere on our own. You get somebody that's down in the Delta or in the flatlands, their Lerp unit, because they're in the flatland like that, I've heard of a couple different divisions that actually used a deuce-and-a-half truck to drive out on the road a couple miles from their green line wire, drop the Lerp team off as an ambush, and then drive back.
It's not that. That doesn't sound very. What's the word? Sneaky.
Smart.
Yeah.
I mean, you drive a truck out, guys get out, watch them go in the bushes. You know, but that's the way they were. Everything was doing different, and there was no right way.
Right.
There was no authorized, standardized way to do it for the military, and that. If you're up a lot higher than my pay grade at that time, but when you're up way high, you're afraid to do anything different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes sense. But I think one of the lessons, for example, Thomas Ricks wrote a book called Fiasco, The American Military Adventure in Iraq 2003 to 2005.
Yeah, Nagl was talking about that.
Yeah, an outstanding book. It's an outstanding book. And one of the things that he talks about is the fact that there were a lot of military men, mostly men, had very, very practical knowledge of combat and what was going to work and what wasn't going to work, how many men we needed for something like an invasion of Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem was that some of this common sense, information wasn't actually listened to by a lot of the policy wonks like whoever it might have been, whether it was, Dick Cheney or Donald Rumsfeld or Paul Wolfowitz, or maybe they weren't talking to each other. But this seems to be a common theme where there is a miscommunication along as it goes up the ladder, or people have an agenda and they don't necessarily care to listen to the other side. So that seems to be something I hear over and over again whenever you start talking about how a war went wrong, et cetera, et cetera.
That is the history of the military in between wars, I think.
Yeah.
An example of that would be after Vietnam, when we declared a victory and pulled out and all of that.
Yeah.
We all came home. The Lerp units were disbanded.
Mm-hmm.
The Army didn't need them anymore. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we were over there in training for the jungle, and all of a sudden there's a word going around, we might go to Israel during that 6-day war thing.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and that scared the bejesus out of all of us. We didn't know a thing about the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the war only lasted 6 days, so but you see what I'm getting at. The stuff we were learning really worked in the jungle. The stuff we were learning really worked as far as tactics go, but applying those tactics to a different geographical environment, the Army really dropped the ball.
Well, a Navy SEAL was talking recently about something similar. He was saying he was a decorated Navy SEAL, and he said, I see a lot of guys who make great soldiers, but they can't deal with the cold. They just can't deal with being in the water for that long. They don't have a body for it. They can't keep heat going, but they're great soldiers. He said, and we're not fighting most of our wars in the next 20 years in the water and when it's real cold. In fact, we're going to be fighting a lot of our wars in the desert. And so, it does behoove sort of a unit to kind of train for the environment they're going to be in. And it sounds like even though you guys were, and I want to get more into this, but you guys were pretty badass and pretty good at your jobs, of course. All of a sudden, if we drop you in the middle of the desert, you got to learn a whole new skill set.
Well, and that's...
we would have been literally babes in the wood. We would not know what was going on in the desert, even though the tactics may have been the same. They may have dropped us off. We may have had to jump or rappel someplace way out of sight and then sneak around back behind this base. But when you're in the desert and you've got 5 miles of visibility everywhere around and there's no place to hide, that kind of screws the concept of a Lerp team.
And, I mean, in terms of, like, what you talk about in the book, there are so many situations where the enemy is literally 2 feet away from you, and they can't see you.
Pissing on your back.
Pissing on your back.
and it might
did read the book.
Yes, yes, we did. Or it might be a tiger, by the way. It could be a tiger.
That is true. I have many people have said, no, that didn't happen, but no, that is true.
I believe it. I believe it. Everything about the book, I believe. The way you write it, you can tell. That was what I loved about it. And I wanted to ask you some guy questions, because I know there are a lot of men.
Okay, but I'm really glad you just said what you said. The way that you wrote it. Because I honestly could not have written this book when I came home.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, one, my maturity level. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I could not have, like I say, these are my vivid memories, but I'm writing them as an older man who's comfortable. So I've got a bigger vocabulary, for one. But back then, that stuff would have been so fresh in my mind that I couldn't have gotten it down on paper the right way. And here's the kicker. Nobody would have believed it.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's true.
I mean, that kind of stuff going on, and I come home and I'm still 21 years old, and I'm trying to say all of this stuff, and no, that couldn't have happened. You're too young. That doesn't. When I did come home, I ended up getting married at first, and my job, I was working for a paper box company. And I remember that the manager, I was asking about a different machine down at the end of the line. I'd like to run that one. Well, no, that one cost $250,000, and you're only 21. You don't have the experience or the reliability for us to train you on that. You're too young.
Oh, boy.
And I remember a couple helicopter pilots that would be in Vietnam, come home on an extension leave, and they were too young to rent a car for their 30-day leave.
Oh, amazing.
They're flying a helicopter in combat.
But that's to be expected. That's to be expected. Pardon? Nobody expects you to grow up that quickly, and you have no choice but to do that when you're thrown in the middle of the jungle from 19 and then 20 and 21.
But it is also so much of the double standard. I mean, that's the whole reason why we reduced the voting age from 21 to 18. I mean, if you expect somebody to die for their country, but you're not allowed to make a decision in who runs the country, that seems a little bizarre.
Yeah, back then I was too young to vote.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about, first of all, there are so many questions, and you touch on them a lot. You get into the nitty-gritty, and this is what I love about what it's like to walk through elephant grass. What happens to your hands, learning how to walk through elephant grass, what it's like to be in that rain all the time, getting trench foot, just your boots and being wet all the time. What in the world... look, I was just in Alaska hunting for 6 days, and I was wet the whole time, and I was crying. But I was like, this is no fun. But
no, because I spent 4 years in Alaska, and I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You had to trump me.
If you're dressed for the weather, Alaska's great.
Yeah.
If you're not dressed for it, that is hell on earth.
It is hell on earth, especially when even the deer were like, you know what? We're going to lower ground. I don't like this place. 6 days is glassing those hills, and I didn't see. I saw 2 doe that I couldn't shoot. It killed me. Anyway, but you were taken and dropped in the middle of enemy territory, out in the middle of nowhere, or I should say, in the middle of the jungle, which is everywhere. I mean, the bugs, the centipede that stung that guy in the back of his ear, that giant 24-inch spider. Scorpions on your privates. You can keep it all, man. Keep it. Thank God for you, but still.
Okay, now keep in mind, you've just mentioned about 4 or 5 things. Over the course of the 3 years that I was there, that didn't happen all the time.
Right.
Yeah, there was a couple missions that were really kind of nice, peaceful.
Well, but so okay. So did you find yourself? What was the mindset before you're going into that? Because you could be killed easily or taken prisoner, and God knows what would have happened to you. So you're living on the edge. What did you do to prepare your mind for that kind of thing, or did you just not prepare your mind? Did you not think about what could happen?
Oh, you're really wanting me to get personal now, huh?
I am.
Okay.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
No. I understand what you're saying. I'm just not really sure how to answer it, or if anybody would actually listen.
That's an answer.
Okay, I was raised a Catholic. You can tell that by the way I described the Mass in there and all of that.
That was a great part of the book, too.
Yeah, and somebody once asked something similar to what you just said. How do you get by, knowing that you may not be here 10 minutes from now? And I looked at him. No, this was a headhunter. Yeah, he was one of the guys I was trying to get a job interview with. He was a headhunter. And he asked, and I said, do you believe in a loving and forgiving God? And he said, sure, of course I do. Then why be afraid to go see him?
Oh, boy. Wow.
Now, yeah, that sounds flip, I grant you.
No, it doesn't.
But it sums up everything, but I had to actually realize that when I was 19 years old.
That is amazing, man.
Now, does that make you grow up, or does that just make me take all the fun out of living, or what?
I don't know. I'm not going to tell you about how look, you had to do it. You had to be dropped in there as a young man. Yeah. And so I'm not going to quantify that.
Oh, no, it was
worked.
Scary. Don't get me wrong. Some of them were kind of spooky.
Yeah.
And
spooky. I love the way a Lerp soldier. I love how you say, well, it was a little spooky. I would have been I would have been wearing diapers, all right?
My daughter says I'm a minimalist.
Yes, you are.
If I had a broken leg, I'd say I got an owie.
You're a man. Yeah. You're a man.
But no. It doesn't do any good to brag about it because nobody's going to believe it anyhow. But getting back to what I was saying about believing in a loving God, that gives you a little bit of consolation for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. But it doesn't really do a whole bunch for everybody else in the group or the unit. And I do remember a couple times on some of those helicopter flights out to our area, and in the monsoon, some of those flights would be really, really wet because they didn't have doors in the helicopter, and they would take a long time to get there. And everybody's in the helicopter. You can't talk to one another because it's too noisy and it's too wet. And I remember making deals with God. Mm-hmm. I volunteered for the Army. I volunteered for jump school. I volunteered for Vietnam. I volunteered for the Lerps. God, I've got a funny feeling about this mission. If anybody is supposed to get hurt, let it be me. I'm the one that volunteered.
Wow.
Let me take care of my team. It was just like me being Big Brother.
Yeah.
You grow up being Big Brother, you can't get away from it. Wow. Being a team leader is not like being a squad leader. But being a team leader, yeah, I was Big Brother again.
Boy, you shame me a little bit with that
No.
story. No, I mean in a good way. I mean, I really appreciate that. I don't live in that world, and I don't think most of us do.
I'm saying things to you guys that I really haven't even said to my family.
Well, we appreciate it, man, because it's very moving to me to hear you say that, and I just find it very interesting. That's kind of what I went to. I mean, it's going to sound really, I don't mean it to sound trite here, but I went to Afghanistan for about 11 days to do some stand-up comedy for the troops. And one of the things that I came away with after spending all this time in Hollywood was that one of the things I really appreciated about the military was the fact that it is all about the guy next to you. You are ingrained. It's ingrained in you that the people around you are in many ways, or the team or the Corps are more important than you are as an individual. And I think
exactly.
Yeah, and I think that kind of giving mindset brings out in many times the best in people.
There's about 100 of us in our unit right now that, still around and go to the reunions every now and then. And it is surprising, even to this day, to hear some of the wives say that their husband still doesn't talk.
Yeah.
But you get a couple ex-Lerps together and, they're just talking like buddies. They're really friendly. So what if it's been 50 years? I remember what you look like, We did things for one another. We didn't do them for Nixon. We didn't do them for Johnson. We didn't do them for the chief of staff. We didn't do them for the commander's tenant on a guidon. We did it just for one another. We did a lot of strange things, And we all knew that everything we were doing was new. So everybody talked among themselves. Well, this worked for me here, but it didn't work over there. So everybody kept incorporating things. And it finally got to the point where one of the running jokes in the unit was, whatever happens, survivors graduate.
Wow. Do you think that a lot of times the reason a man like that doesn't talk to his wife is because, and then he talks to you guys, is because you guys went through something you have to experience in order to understand?
Yeah, okay. You really want to know about that scorpion, don't you? You see what I'm getting at?
He's wearing,
you would have to feel it, guys, in order to get the right feeling that I tried to put in paper.
Yes, you would. Yes, you would. I wouldn't be surprised if you were wearing that thing around your neck and it was encased in amber right now. Man,
no, the only thing that, okay, getting back to the scorpion, because that's going to come up either way. Actually, when he stung me on that last part, that was about the third bite. So
well,
he was running.
Probably a lot of ground to cover with a man like yourself.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember getting an owie when I first sat in the helicopter.
Hold on. He just called it. Hold on. Everybody, James Seymour just referred to getting stung on the dick by a scorpion as an owie. So this is a man we're talking to. Keep going. Sorry to interrupt. I had to.
And also,
do you know how hard that was to splint?
Oh my God!
Yeehaw! I'll tell you what. Listen, you may have done a lot of things for your friends, but I would not have helped you. I would not have helped you splint that bad boy. I mean, maybe with some big gloves.
Yeah.
I would have needed some moral support from my boys.
No, but you keep it all in perspective, and it's all relative. I was stung once on the lower leg, and then I was stung again in the thigh when I first got off the helicopter. And then I took about 10 steps, and he was crawling around in my pants, and he found something else to sting. And that's when I dropped to my knees. But if he had done that the first time...
That brought him to his knees. I told you you should have worn some lead-lined underwear. How many times I got to tell you? Come on.
We didn't wear underwear.
You didn't wear underwear. That's why they call it going jungle.
Commando.
Going commando. Yeah.
To this day, we do not wear underwear.
How can you tell a Lerp amongst us? Have him drop trow. Now, why didn't you wear underwear? Because you wanted to keep the fungus at bay. You wanted air in there.
Yeah, the fungus at bay and crotch rot, jungle rot. That really was prevalent over there.
Yeah.
And we found out that if you wore the Hanes underwear and all of that did was it would stay wet.
Oh, boy, yeah.
The uniform would dry out, but your underwear would stay wet, so it just wasn't worth it. And then you get the rash and everything else, and yeah. It just worked out to wear the uniform, and you kept the sock. We wore the socks for the whole mission. We never changed, but we never wore underwear.
Wow.
Not a wow. It just worked.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the other things that was interesting was that you guys started wearing the same clothes as the local people as well, right? You would wear those black fatigues.
Tiger fatigues.
Some teams did, yes.
Yeah.
If they were going to go into an area that had a lot of quote unquote civilians around the area, then they would take a set of black pajamas in their pack, so that if they ever had to move around and might be spotted then they would be looking a little bit like locals.
And was it just for the look, or was it also that material or whatever it was particularly well suited to the jungle environment?
Oh, for the other side, that was perfect for the jungle environment.
Mm-hmm. I think that
we were wearing it only just for a camouflage to blend in with. Yeah.
You talk about developing a respect for your enemy, which is why the wooden nickels, they gave those to you to put on the bodies. You just didn't like that because it felt like you were bragging over the enemy. And one of the things that stuck with me is when they interviewed General Giap, and I think he was speaking to, it might have been McNamara, in fact. I think they sat down and met, and he said, if you had picked up a history book, you would have realized that there was no way we were ever going to surrender to you because we'd been fighting for our independence for thousands of years. And you developed a respect for your enemy. When and how and why did that happen?
Okay, I got there starry-eyed and gung-ho, and we're going to win the war, and I'm an American, and we are on the right. As soon as I landed in Vietnam, I knew we were going to win, because you look at all of the ships, you look at all of the trucks, you look at all of the airplanes unloading equipment and stuff. There's no way this little podunk army can stand up to all of that.
Right.
That was the mindset. That was the way I had been trained.
Sure.
When I first got there, that's what that's what the whole Western Hemisphere was thinking. And then after a period of time, okay, we can keep shooting bullets, but unless you make the other guy change his mind, all you're doing is killing people.
Well, now I want to talk. That's really the other thing I got from this book, and this is something that I think is the lesson to be learned. You can't sometimes shoot your way out of or into a situation you want to be in. If you're trying to win hearts and minds, it takes a lot more than heavy weaponry.
And if you have to win hearts and minds, because I think that's the thing is that's World War II. It was symmetrical warfare, right? It's army against army, and they're facing off, and you're blowing up factories, and you're doing all of those sorts of things.
And we were trying to find the factories and the hospitals, but there weren't any, and that was kind of befuddling the powers that be, because we've got this big army here, and we've got all of these guns and bullets and bombs, but we can't find anybody to give them to.
Do you follow politics? Did you have a point of view on Iraq and Afghanistan? I know I'm asking. I know it's probably sticky.
No. I really. Okay, it happened after 9/11.
Yep.
Everybody was unified at 9/11.
Yep.
And I watched the Rangers jump into Pakistan, and I wish to God I would have been there with them. Then we went into Iraq. And why?
Everybody I talk to in the military says the same thing.
Yeah, why? I mean, they're over there in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Why are we in Iraq?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Iraq, I knew we were screwed.
You did right away.
No, not right away, but in that 30 days shock and awe.
Yep.
Because for 30 days, we just bombed the bejesus out of something, and everybody is running around. All of these hooligans are just running around, picking up weapons, moving them someplace else, and they just let it happen. And, wow. That's when I said, okay, forget Iraq, I'll concentrate on the news coming out of Pakistan.
That was it. You just knew right away.
Yeah, because that shock and awe, that served no military purpose.
Yeah.
And then letting everybody run around, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what's interesting in there is that, shock and awe, those terms are specifically emotional terms, right? So your goal with those terms is to achieve an emotional goal. But
yeah, it's impressive if you've never been in the military.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you've been in the military, shock and awe, well, you're just wasting a bunch of armament. And
that's the thing is part of the hearts and minds, a large part of what you're saying in your book, a large part of what John Nagl is saying is that the emotional goal that you end up achieving on the population is the opposite of the one that you want, because they end up hating you for, bombing them and their families into oblivion and end up turning them against you.
Well, those are the lessons. I mean, those are the lessons. There's,
Hunter, you just said it in a way that makes me think we're in a classroom. Do you speak like that all the time?
Yeah, he went to Harvard. He's one of those academics.
No, I mean, you're very articulate, and I wish to God I could do that.
Yeah,
but,
Hunter's very smart.
Yeah, but you hit it on the head right there. And I couldn't even say again what you said, but you just summed up the whole fiasco thing there, that shock and awe and what it did or how it's perceived by the people that you're trying to shock and awe.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of that is lost on a lot of the military. I really don't. I think that it took a while for some of these guys to realize that when you break into a house in Iraq and you put your boot on the head of a man while his hands are taped and his kids and wife are crying and you're searching his house.
Now, he's Iraqi and you put your boot on his head?
Yeah. And
here you got a culture thing right there.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so what the Marine, or I can't remember who it was who said it, but he was a counterinsurgency expert. He said to his higher-ups, and I think that at the time the general was General Sanchez, I think. I'm sorry if I'm getting the names wrong, but and he said to him, you're creating a blood debt in this society when you put your boot on a man's head while his wife is crying and his kids are crying, and you search his house or ransack his house, which was what these Marines or infantry guys were just following orders, for God's sake. They didn't know about Iraqi culture, but he said, you just created another insurgent. That guy's got to pick up a gun now and shoot at you just on principle. That you created a blood debt in this society, and I think that the military. I don't have all the details, of course, but I think a lot of the military realized that after a while and started to try to change their tactics. I think by that point it was probably too late for a lot of reasons.
But I think
we don't
that's
have to
the
get
thing.
into all the issues. But
we may appreciate this on some sort of rational level, but we really haven't internalized these lessons. And it's one thing for the military to understand that, but as long as the general public, people who have not fought in the military, sit around and keep on demanding, like, something must be done about ISIS, why aren't we invading, aren't we doing this, then we're going to keep, and this really gets down to, how do we support our troops? Because so often what we hear is that we should support unconditional, military engagement. But I think if you really want to support your troops, the best way is to make sure that they don't give their lives unnecessarily.
And you do it the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of this macho posturing going on, and it's usually by guys in suits wearing a tie.
That's right. That's right.
They want to be known as the aggressor or the standoffish one or whatever, and they have no idea what that translates to the people on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got that from a lot of the neocons as I was listening to them. None of them had done a day in the military, but they were puffing their chests and talking about blood debts, and we got to get these guys. And I was like, "Are you going to do the fighting, man? You guys gonna be out there?"
That will piss off every soldier that you ever talk to. They all say the same thing. The people that are sending us have never been in uniform.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go on record right now, and I'm going to go to my death saying the same thing, but we need a draft.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because it would keep people, because people would think a little bit more.
Ooh, that might be a politician's son that got drafted.
Yeah,
and
a little more
send
deeply.
him over there. There's, The Fortunate Son by CCR.
Yep, love that song.
Yeah, and that really applied back then.
Yep.
If we had a draft, if our military was more representational of our population and not just another working class category right now, then I think they would be a little bit more reasonable in their use of military force.
I think there is an argument to be made there.
I think the crucial thing, though, is about exemptions as well, because it's like taxes or like anything else. The wealthy are going to be much better at finding clever ways to get around it. So you have to make sure that it's a real draft.
Yeah, that's going to be going on from now until the day the world ends.
Right.
That's just human nature. But we need somehow to make it so that the military is not just another class of people that the politicians can use.
Mm-hmm. Right. One of the other...
I don't know how that would happen, but, from where I see it, yeah, we need a draft.
Well,
But I understand all the exemption problem.
Well, and one of our listeners had a really interesting idea, which is that if you really want to fix the VA, you make it so that senators and congressmen have to get their medical care from the VA. And you can guarantee that the VA would be fixed real fast.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
But then that makes me a bad American to say that, because that shows my cynicism about the government.
I don't think so.
No,
Mark Twain, I always say this, Mark Twain said, loyalty to my country always, loyalty to my government only when it deserves it.
But I think that's the thing is that, yeah, being a good American is about being cynical about the government. I mean, so much of our responsibility is to be that ultimate check on government power as the people.
Yeah.
Well, and Hunter said something, we were talking on the way here, Jim, and he said, I said, I wonder if as I read these books, In the Jungle, the book we're talking about, everybody, by the way, In the Jungle, Camping with the Enemy by James Seymour. I read John Nagl's book. I read Fiasco. You wonder at times if whenever you go into war, these lessons, you can actually learn a lesson, if they're even applicable to the next war. And Hunter said, well, they have to be. You have to think that we are, and we continue to learn. It might be in small increments, but to think otherwise is to be cynical and more importantly, probably not respectful to the people that gave their lives. And if we don't learn from that example and learn how to make things better the next time, then we are remiss.
Yes, and how do you get that across to the military of the moment that this is working today, but you're going to try and tell the generals that what is working today needs to be changed or modified, or at least not be so rigid so that it can be used tomorrow over there, not here.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's the problem, preparation.
Well, but I think the interesting thing, too, is that, as we're talking about this more and more, I realize that the real obstacles to learning these lessons are emotional. Right? It's that, there's an appeal to being really macho and aggressive and all of that sort of stuff.
Oh, until you hear the first gunshot.
Exactly. And so that's the thing is, what we really have to figure out is a large part of this is operating and approaching these things from a place of humility and really being willing to ask those difficult questions and making this much more of an investigation rather than pretending in the face of something like 9/11, we know exactly how to handle this, we know exactly what to do, here's the easy answer. But understanding that we may have to do some thinking and some reflecting rather than just operating out of a place of fear.
I agree.
Amen.
One of the sections that I really, really loved about the book, and that was not something that I had even thought about, but it was you articulated so coherently, was talking about the effects on the Vietnamese people of that wartime economy, and the different currencies, and then what happened when we devalued that currency. Would you mind telling that story?
Oh, yeah, but I don't mind telling it, but you have to understand I don't know what I'm talking about.
But
no, I'm not an economist, but as a 19, 20-year-old who just came from Main Street, hometown America, and then you go over to virtually another world, was what Vietnam was at that time. You recognize every now and then a Coca-Cola signal or a Standard Oil signal, but everything is in French or in Vietnamese. And the military that we were using then was really building and improving a lot of the Vietnam that I saw when I was in the engineers as a non-combatant.
Oh.
I was back in the rear, kind of.
Right.
And so I could see all of the little villages and stuff like that were closer to the coast and along the main highways. You could see where a lot of your medical clinics and your government buildings were being either built or enhanced by the American engineers and CBs and things like that. Plus, they would be building a base over here. And on that base, they would hire a bunch of locals, to run the wash point, the water point, or the laundry or stuff like that. The military outlawed greenbacks while all of this is going on. So the military had to use a funny money, monopoly money, a military script that represented the same thing as U.S. greenback. It came to the point where the dong, which is the penny in Vietnam, was worth pretty much the same as the penny in America. So a $1 military script, the Vietnamese would accept downtown. If you wanted to go get a haircut or something like that, they would accept the $1 military script, as well as they would accept you paying 100 dong.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Eventually, over time, the military script had more usage than the Vietnamese dong. And I don't know, here again, I'm not the economist, but eventually the Vietnamese would prefer the military script over their own national currency. Now, I don't know if that devalues or the world market did or whatever, but everybody everywhere was using the U.S. military monopoly money, the funny money, the script.
Right.
It worked on bases. It worked on the local economy. It would work down in Saigon if you're trying to buy a flight over to Kuala Lumpur. The military script worked everywhere. It really was horrendous because then the Vietnamese who were out in the middle of no place, that were not near these urban centers, they were restricted primarily to using the Vietnamese dong. So if you get a bunch of hill people that come down and they're going to the city, and all they've got is their their Vietnamese money,
And now it's worth very little, yeah.
it's worth a hell of a lot less than it was last year when they came down to buy their winter supplies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I did make mention in the book one time where they had an emergency conversion. And what they did was they restricted all Americans to all U.S. bases for 48 hours, and they pulled in, they collected all of the military script from every U.S. soldier, whatever. And then they issued new ones. And then that meant all of the old script was now worthless, trying to save the Vietnamese dong.
So, but then overnight, because I mean that's one of the images that you really talk about. You have these people who have worked really hard. They've done all sorts of trade with the American servicemen, and then overnight their entire savings are made worthless, and a lot of them weren't even able to trade in that script.
Right. The lady that's running the laundry and the guy that's running the butcher shop downtown that he sells meat over there to the scout dogs, everything that they had saved in their mattress is gone. They are now broke.
And
they
so,
have no money.
And that's, I mean, I think that's the sort of stuff that, you know, always gets lost, or that historically has gotten lost when we talk about war in terms of effects. Because if you want to lose hearts and minds, the fastest way to do it is to wipe out a person's net worth.
Yeah, I would say that, but I was only 20 years old, and you're just watching all of these people with wicker baskets full of this MPC script.
Mm-hmm.
And that just shows you how much that they actually dealt with the Americans, but it also shows how much the Vietnamese economy was not working.
Right.
When you wrote this book,
I wrote this book over the last 30 years.
Over the last 30 years, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it started out, if you read the front, a couple of different guys, we were all talking, and I ended up trying to put down a bunch of stuff on paper for therapy.
Wow.
PTSD and all that.
Yep.
And it takes a long time to get a lot of that out of your head onto paper, even though it's only ending up as a couple paragraphs.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, I had a whole bunch of this stuff written up, trying to string them all together. And then I got I got to be able to be thankful that I'm old enough that I've got a vocabulary now that I could have done it.
Well, listen, we really, really appreciate it. I think it's made a difference, at least, I mean, you know, and hopefully on this podcast and certainly in my mind. And we really appreciate you taking the time, not only to write the book, obviously, and I know it took 30 years, but I think it was well worth the effort.
30 years and getting stung on the dick by a scorpion.
Yeah, and you know, we'll end with just personally, it's going to sound like, you know, you should never really do an interview like this. I really like listening to you speak. I feel like when I hear a man like yourself, you just seem so inherently decent. Maybe it's from your upbringing, from your experiences, from everything. But
no, it's just that if you're asking a question, the only thing I can do is answer it honestly. And from what I hear, a couple people are saying I have ability to describe things. So.
Well, whatever it is, you make me feel like everything is right in the world, sir, and I appreciate that. So you're kind of like a warm blanket.
Well, just remember, we're all a big brother to somebody.
Yeah, well, I can see why you were a team leader, because you still got a lot of that in you. And,
well, yeah, because I was also selfish. If I'm out in the middle of nowhere, who do I have to depend on?
Your team, yourself, and your
so
team.
I better make sure they're trained well, right?
Yep, that's right. Sounds like common sense to me.
Yeah, and that honestly is what kept us going. If you grab 5 soldiers out of foxholes and send them out as a Lerp team, they're useless.
Yep.
But you get 5 guys that are trained, and these 5 guys, they all know the training everybody else had. Yep. They feel protected because they are with better trained people that know how to use serum albumin, or they can pick up the radio and they can call FAC, things like that. Yeah, you just have more faith in more well-trained people.
Well, you know what? I got faith in you. I love the book. The book is called In the Jungle, Camping with the Enemy by James Seymour. Pick it up. It's just, it really does give you a sense of what it was like to be in that jungle. And it's not something you can necessarily describe. We talked about how you have to experience something. It's very hard to describe. I think you've done it. I think you've done it in this book.
And I would also say that it's an excellent companion piece to John Nagl's work because, you know, you're sort of seeing like the macro and then the very on the ground perspective is what, Mr. Seymour gives us.
I honestly can visualize the Alaska National Guard terrorizing his unit.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the thing. It's the same conclusions from very different perspectives, and that really lets you know how right on those conclusions are.
Yep.
Right.
In the Jungle, Camping with the Enemy. W. James Seymour, thank you, sir, for joining us, man. It was a real pleasure.
Well, thank you for your support, truly.
Where do you live, sir?
Beg your pardon?
Where do you live?
I live up here in the Pacific Northwest in a town called Kirkland, Washington.
I'm going to be in
It's the home of Costco.
I like it. Well, there you go. I'm going to be in Portland, Oregon. If you find yourself anywhere near that area, I'm going to be doing stand-up, and I will get in touch with you, and you will have. I will lay out the red carpet, and you'll have front row seats. So there it is.
I would like to see that. Okay.
I'll make you laugh. That's all I can promise you. I'll make you laugh. You'll learn nothing but you'll laugh.
Nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Okay, and you guys have a good day now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
James Seymour, a real man, an American. And
Brian, I think the listeners should know that you're currently making the Rocky pose.
I am making the Rocky pose right now. And, I find it a privilege to get to talk to these people. Once again, Hunter Motz.
This was not, again, like I can't take credit for this. Ryan, one of our listeners, reached out and suggested it.
Ryan, you're a good man. What's his last name? Do we know?
Ryan Knight.
Ryan Knight.
Which is a great last name.
Ryan Knight, you're a good man. Thank you for finding this guy. And we love these suggestions. We love our listeners. And what's most important is that you all love me. All right.
Separately, I would also say that if other people have guest suggestions, we're always looking for new, interesting people.
Hey, when is this going to air? Do we have any idea?
This should air, I think, actually Thursday, probably tomorrow.
All right, listen up, everybody. Listen up. I'm going to be, where am I going to be? I'm next week, November 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. I'm going to be in Tempe, Arizona. I'm doing stand-up. Come out and see me. I will be tearing it up. Tempe, Arizona, ladies and gentlemen.
This is a nice time of year to be in Tempe.
I know, November 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, which I didn't, by the way, forgot I was going to be in Tempe, Arizona. How about that? Forgot.
Oh, well, that's good. Had you booked an airplane ticket?
No, I haven't bought my ticket yet. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
I'm sure you're going to get a really good deal.
Oh, great deal.
You're going to, have you ever flown?
I make a fortune on this podcast.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show with Bryan Callen. Be sure to like him on Facebook. Just search for Bryan Callen Comedy. And follow him on Twitter. Just search for @Bryan Callen. You can also find him online by visiting his website. Just go to bryancallen.com. Until next time, bye-bye.